Expand a little bit on consumer behavior, kind of like not just what it is as at a discipline, but what you saw it as. Because I had a professor that I was pretty cool with back in university, and a lot of his concentration was on consumer behavior. And just to kind of move the conversation along, he would study like he'd go into like they go into like a sports stadium, and they would look at how things are organized, and like just the simple way of organizing products in a certain way would mean that someone was more likely to buy more without having to be advertised to. And I mean, you probably saw
Yeah,
that in retrospect back at your time when you look back at your time at Ralph's, the grocery store going, "Oh, that's why they put this here, and that
totally.
one's in the aisle as well."
Yeah, I mean, there's a really oh my god, I'm blanking on his name, but I there's a really good book on this concept called Nudge, which is all around product placement, merchandising, and consumer behavior. And it's really in the field of behavioral economics and talk about like all those things kind of coming together. Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, like I'm really fascinated with people and why people tick and how they work. And so I think going into consumer behavior was also that like kind of pull into psychology, and
Yes.
how psychology works, how people work in psychology, but then also the productization of this, all the kind of touch points that make somebody make a decision. And so that's consumer behavior, the study of consumer behavior. It's like down from the merchandising to the pricing to the advertising to all of these kind of like different components. And I think I was just always really interested in that like kind of dot connection experience of like what is going to make somebody go to that area. I ended up going into merchandising, which is a lot of what you're talking about in terms of like putting a product here and what goes on a mannequin, like how will that sell? And then is that the most appropriate unit? Do we have enough in stock? Like you're kind of in this balancing act of like determining how to nudge and when to nudge. And I think I was always super interested in how people kind of make those decisions and get nudged and then, move forward with that purchase.
How did you find your very first job in media marketing? If I've got this correct, it was you were a trade show associate at the California Market Center.
Yeah, I mean, I was a trade show associate and that's a part of the fashion industry that I think a lot of people forget. It's easy to kind of like think about the glossy magazines. But there's like a whole production team behind the industry. I mean, it's massive. It's billions of dollars. But yeah, I learned a lot about the industry as a trade show associate because it's really working with the behind the scenes, the buyers and the vendors, and in all sorts of different everything from like a textile, so you're like in the ground floor of production to finished products and to so then that's what's going out to Macy's and all these other big box stores. So it was just like a really interesting time period, especially because there was so much influence and the start of social media. And so global production and trade was really kind of like impacted the industry in I think ways that people weren't like totally aware of how we were going to look. I mean, now looking at it, it's like, of course, like the more exposure that people have around the globe, like the more they're going to want something from, I want these specific shoes that are only released in Japan and like how do I get them and kind of the commerce that happens around that. But I think working in those areas to, that trajectory really kind of like made that connection point from like commerce to production to media a lot more visible.
That example you just gave, the first thing that popped into my mind was scarcity and remember the brand Supreme? Do they still
Oh,
even
a
exist?
100%. Oh, yes, they and like people are trying to bring them back. I was just having this conversation with my nephew, who's about to be 17, and he's like, "Supreme is still cool." I'm like, I don't know. Are they still cool? And we're having this whole kind of conversation. But I think, brands are interesting because you age out of them and then they come back around and, fashion is very cyclical in that way.